The 9 o'clock crowd at the station was the same as always. Heads down, eyes on their phones, earbuds in. No one was looking at anyone else's face. An elderly man waiting right in the middle of the platform suddenly buckled at the knees. He staggered first, then fell to the ground with his full weight. As the old leather bag slipped from his hand and hit the hard floor, the zipper popped open. The pill bottles, his glasses, and a few crumpled pieces of paper inside scattered across the concrete. The commotion was brief, followed by an eerie silence. No one approached. Fear, often a force stronger than indifference itself, prevents people from doing the right thing. Just then, a young woman running from the direction of the turnstiles pushed through the crowd and knelt beside the man. Her name was Nora. She was only 19 years old and was still wearing the vest from the grocery store where she worked. What she did in the next 90 seconds would be watched for years on the station's security cameras and would be talked about time and again, even by people who had never met her. Before we begin this story, if you believe that kindness doesn't end when a person dies, that it continues on its path even after the farewell, please like this video, subscribe to the After Goodbye channel, and share it today with someone who needs to believe in people again. Nora's hands weren't shaking. This would be the detail people talked about the most afterward. A 19-year-old girl in a grocery store vest with no medical training was moving as if she'd done this hundreds of times. Yet she'd never done it before. She'd only read about it from a notebook. A notebook that belonged to her grandmother, Eleanor, who had passed away a year earlier. Eleanor was a woman who had worked as a midwife in a rural area for 42 years and later served as an assistant nurse at the only clinic in the town where she settled. In a small town with just one clinic, the doctor was often just a voice on the other end of the phone. Most of the time, caring for the patients fell to Eleanor and her skilled hands. When she retired and moved to the city to be with Nora, she had almost nothing with her except for one thing, an old notebook with worn edges. Inside, in her own handwriting, was everything she had learned over 40 years. Why the first 30 seconds are so critical when a heart stops, how deep chest compressions should be, and countless other vital pieces of information. During the last 2 years of her life, every evening after dinner, Eleanor and Nora would read through that notebook page by page together. Eleanor hadn't just taught her granddaughter knowledge. She taught her how to move beyond that initial fear. When someone falls, she'd say, you fall for a second too. Then you get back up. It's not about not being afraid. The point is not to stay there. Nora checked the old man's pulse. There was none. She placed her hands exactly in the center of his chest, just as described in the notebook, kept her arms straight, and pressed down with all her weight. 1, 2, 3. Someone in the crowd shouted that an ambulance was on the way. Nora didn't stop. 3 compressions, 2 breaths, then 3 more compressions, and in the middle of the third cycle, the man coughed. Then he took a deep, ragged breath. He opened his eyes. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief, as if releasing a breath they'd been holding without even realizing it. When the medical team arrived, Nora stepped back, squeezed the man's hand once, and tried to walk away without saying a word. The man's daughter, a woman in her 50s who had just been gasping for breath, grabbed him by the arm. "Please," she said, "don't leave without telling me your name. Let's pause here for a moment. Because what Nora did on that platform is only the most visible part of the story. The After Goodbye wants you to know about the people who made this possible, people who were never seen on camera. 30 years ago, a young Eleanor had learned the intricacies of emergency care from a rural doctor named Dr. Whitfield. This man never once told her, "You're just a midwife." Instead, he chose to teach her by saying, "Anyone who learns this can save a life." He had given her a copy of his own lecture notes, which over the years, page by page, would become Eleanor's own notebook. Then, when Eleanor moved to the city, she would be able to read that notebook comfortably with her young granddaughter Nora and teach her these lessons. And Nora's high school teacher, Mr. Bennett, never once told Eleanor that it was silly for Nora, who dreamed of studying a different field, to take these classes. On the contrary, He believed that every conscientious citizen should learn this material and that one day, if necessary, this knowledge could save a life. This is what the after goodbye believes in. When a person leaves this world, the kindness they showed while alive does not end with them. It is carried on through the hands, voices, and decisions of their loved ones. Dr. Whitfield's notes. Grandmother Eleanor showing them to her granddaughter. Mr. Bennett's quiet encouragement. They were all there on that platform with Nora, even if no one knew it or saw it. The man's name was Julian. He was 78 years old and a retired carpenter. In the hospital waiting room, he hugged his daughter Nora and cried on her shoulder. But the detail that changed everything came to light a few days later. Julian, who was recovering and couldn't sit still, wanted to see Nora again the day he was discharged and invited her to his home to thank her properly in person. As they talked, Julian mentioned the name of the town where he had grown up. It was the town where Nora's grandmother lived. Once Nora got over her surprise, she told Julian that her grandmother, Eleanor, had worked as a midwife in that very town. When Julian heard the name Eleanor, he couldn't hide his astonishment. Because about 50 years ago, when Julian was still a young man in his 20s, it was none other than Eleanor, the midwife who had done everything in her power to keep his wife clinging to life during a childbirth where she was nearly on the brink of death. Unable to hold back his tears, a single word slipped from Julian's lips. So kindness really does never fade away. It reappears before us from one century to the next. That night, Nora returned home and opened her grandmother's notebook once more. She turned to the very last page and in her own handwriting added a sentence to the blank page. Today, your hands passed through mine and brought someone back. I thought I'd said goodbye to you. I was wrong. You never left. Then she sat down and wrote a letter to be delivered to the sheriff of the town where her grandmother had lived, hoping it might reach Dr. Whitfield if he were still alive. In the letter, she explained how the notebook left by her grandmother had saved a life years later, thanks to Dr. Whitfield's teachings. When the letter, delivered to the town, was passed on to Dr. Whitfield's family, it was framed and hung in the memorial room. Never look down on anyone based on how young they are, what they're wearing, or whether they have a diploma, and never believe that a farewell marks the end of a story. Sometimes the people we love most don't just leave us with memories. They quietly place something else in our hands, a piece of knowledge, a reflex, a kind of courage, a kindness waiting to return to the world through us. At exactly the right moment, often in ways we never expected. There's one more thing to know about that day, something Nora learned months later. The stranger who shouted that the ambulance was on its way, whose voice cut through the panic and gave Nora those 2 or 3 seconds of calm she needed to keep working, was actually Priya, who worked at the station. She was off duty that day. She'd had years of emergency response training, but she'd frozen in place, certain that someone more qualified and knowledgeable than herself would step forward. Later, she told Nora that watching a 19-year-old girl act without a moment's hesitation had changed something inside her. The following year, Priya completed her full paramedic certification, which she'd been putting off for 10 years. Now she carries a card in her wallet authorizing her to provide first aid in situations like this until emergency responders arrive. Maybe today, somewhere, she's saving a life, or has already saved one. If this story has touched you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it today with someone who needs a reason to believe in people. Subscribe to The After Goodbye for stories of the silent legacies we leave behind. Things that were left behind, but find new life in someone else's hands exactly when they're needed most. Because sometimes a goodbye isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it lives on in a notebook, in a grandchild's hands, on an ordinary day, right in the middle of an ordinary train platform. Welcome to The After Goodbye. We're glad you're here.